was only 14 the day they dressed her in silk and sorrow. Her hands trembled, not from excitement, but from the chilling truth whispered through stone corridors. She was being sold, not wed, not to a prince, not even to a nobleman in his glory, but to a frail, aging lord whose wealth could move armies and whose illness had turned him cruel, suspicious, and paranoid. Her name was whispered like a warning, not yet a legend, because legends are not born, they are forged in silence, humiliation, and fire. That day, when the gates of Ironwood Castle closed behind her, they said she would disappear into his shadow. But years later, the entire kingdom would tremble at her name. Some called her the Widow Queen, others the Silver Serpent. But those who truly knew her story called her something far more human, far more terrifying. They called her the woman who taught an empire to fear regret. If you are ready to witness how an innocent girl became one of the most unpredictable forces in royal history, subscribe now, because the history you're about to hear doesn't live in books anymore. It lives in blood, memory, and consequence. She arrived at Ironwood as a child in a woman's gown, pale with the kind of composure learned under duress. The castle smelled of cedar, boiled broth, and something older, lime and stale wine seeping from the tapestries. Outside the battlements, the harvest had failed 3 seasons running. Inside the great hall, men spoke of accounts and heirs as if famine were a ledger to be balanced. They dressed her in blue silk that afternoon, pinned a ribbon that hid the bruise she had learned to hide with a smile, and placed her hand into the fist of Lord Harrow, a lord so enfeebled by age and illness that courtiers joked his shadow outlived him. Harrow's infirmities were public and private both. He favored a chair by the south window where the sun, rare as it was, might warm his gout-swollen knees. His breath rasped like the wind through an empty barn. He suspected everyone of plotting, stared too long at his own sons as if they were thieves in waiting, and favored poisons as mythology favors monsters, with whispered names and closed doors. Those who arranged the marriage insisted it would seal alliances, produce heirs, and secure lands that otherwise fractured like old plaster. For her family, crushed by debts and a father who gambled away grain, the marriage was a ledger entry meant to save them from ruin. Elara, because that was the name the old nurse sang to her when the nights in the guest chamber felt vast and hungry, learned fast. The arithmetic of survival ceremony was a map. Who bowed, who kept silent, where to place your eyes. The castle's rhythms became her tutors. She watched the steward with his ledger, and the apothecary mixing bitter roots and thick syrups. She listened to the servants' gossip like contraband instruction. They spoke of Harrow's doctors, of odd disappearances of small but essential things. Coins, ink, a favored hound. She watched the court's children play at war with wooden swords, while men in embroidered waistcoats carved alliances into marriages and betrayals into land deeds. What surprised the court, and frightened them quietly, was how she learned the castle with a patient cruelty. She did not scream or flee. She took the tasks that bored the others, reading the old steward's account books, memorizing the names of tenants, learning the season when the river still ran clear. She learned the faces of women in the market who bartered herbs for bread. From the apothecary, she learned which poultices soothed, and which plants tasted like iron, and made men sleep without waking. She learned to listen to how Harrow's servants spoke about him when they thought the hallways were empty, to the way his steward counted with his lips pressed thin as a knife. The castle mocked her youth openly. Lords lingered over her laughter and then traded it for wagers. Daughters of rival houses smiled as if pity were a jewel to wear. Harrow himself alternated between a desperate tenderness, born of loneliness, and a suspicion that carved at his bones. In his worst moments, he accused her of espionage, asked her to recite the names of nobles she had never met, and demanded she produce children as if conception were a bushel of wheat. In private, when the candle wax dripped and his hand shook less with pain and more with tremors of regret, he told her stories about his late wife, his voice softening like a flint cooled in water, and then, in the same breath, tested her with a list of favors he wanted fulfilled after his death. She learned how to make enemies believe she was harmless. She learned to perform grief or fondness as armor. And yet beneath every practiced smile, there grew a slow reaching ice, the realization that power in a court rusted quickly if one did not learn the secret language of survival. When the steward once forgot to mark a payment, Elara corrected him with such precise knowledge of the family's holdings that he looked at her as if a weathered map had spoken his own name. When a young squire mocked her for drinking tea with the apothecary, she told him in a soft voice that the same roots that eased Harrow's cough could also shorten it. He laughed, then watched his father's eyes when those words reached him. There were small rebellions she could afford: an extra loaf given to a widow townswoman, a cloak mended and left anonymously at the gate, but nothing open. The court required patience and the trade of small deeds for small favors. Her secret projects were careful. A ledger left out for the wrong eye to find. A letter misfiled that later proved useful when Harrow's eldest son attempted to press a claim on a manor by forging a document. Each small disruption drew a thread nearer to the heart of the castle's power. It was during a late autumn, when the river turned color of old pewter and the hawthorns bled leaves like confessions, that the first true break came. Harrow grew quieter in the afternoons. His voice, once brittle with accusation, softened to a single repetitive question about meaning and regret. He refused foods that once pleased him. The doctor spoke in circles around fever and a failing heart. The steward lowered his eyes and spoke of the law. On a night thick with frost, when the moon drew a pale coin over the battlements, a distant servant, breathless, mud on his boots, found Elara standing by the south window, staring at a place where Harrow had taken to sit. He handed her a folded cloth and a hand-sealed note. She unfolded it with fingers that did not tremble. The handwriting was an old looping script she recognized from the steward's ledger. It was the sort of message courtiers write when they want history to lie softly about them. It read, plainly and with the coldest courtesy, "By Lord Harrow's command, in the event of my passing, Lady Elara shall assume guardianship of my house and estates until the heir's majority. Any attempt to contest shall be considered treason." Elara did not laugh. The note should have been a trap, or at least a weapon wielded by men who preferred the certainty of law to the mess of grief. It was instead a key left carelessly in a parlor door. She slid the note into her sleeve and laid her palm on the sill where Harrow had warmed his hand. Outside, the castle's wind seemed to hold its breath. At dawn, the steward arrived with faces drawn as if by candlelight. and spoke in the hush reserved for birthing and executions. Harrow's chamber was empty save for his chair, the tasseled cushion stained with a slow, dark bloom. The hearth had gone to smolder. A single small cup lay on the bedside table, its rim dark with the residue of medicine. The steward looked past Elara as if he expected to find the answer in her expression. "He's dead," someone said, though the word had no heat left in it. The castle swelled with rumors before the sun had finished climbing. Within the hour, the first accusing eyes had found her. The castle's corridors filled, at once, with pity and accusation, like two armies meeting on a narrow bridge. Elara presented the steward's note with hands that did not betray the hours she had spent counting coins by candlelight. The law in Lord Harrow's code was plain. Guardianship fell to the widow until the heir reached majority. That sentence, inked in a tremulous hand, was a rope thrown into a storm. Men in embroidered doublets called it a comfort. Men in plain cloaks called it an opportunity. The eldest son railed, his voice a cracked bell. He swore the note was forged, that a dying man's whim could not extinguish birthright. Her trial was a theater where truth and theater spoke the same language. Witness, oath, and the sound of paper sliding across a table. Elara did not plead innocence. She did not ask for mercy. She produced facts, ledgers, the steward's corroboration, the apothecary's delivery logs for the medicine Harrow had taken in his last weeks. She let the court see how the manor's granaries had been miscounted, how harvest levies had been skimmed, how cloth bales had evaporated into the private purses of men who preached piety. It was not a defense. It was an indictment of the house that had bought her silence with coin. The eldest son, furious and shamed, fled with a handful of knights and a list of grievances that he sold house to house. He promised to tear her down and place the name Harrow back on its throne. It nearly worked. There were nights when the castle's banners hung limp and the kitchens emptied overnight, and there were whispers that a blade might find her in the dark. But Elara had learned the arithmetic of loyalty. She fed bakers whose carts had once been seized. She paid midwives who had been refused coin. She ordered the steward to set aside grain for the winter in a public ledger. The peasants' eyes are a kind of record-keeping. They remembered who kept bread on the table. Power, she discovered, is frequently contested by those who believe it owed to birth, and kept by those who can deliver. She used both truths. She married alliances with distant houses by sowing small marriages, dowries paid in grain and vows. She softened her cruelty with public gestures. Festivals returned after famine, laws that protected widows' small plots from rapacious claimants. Yet she also sent men into the night to recover documents, bribed a clerk to recount a ledger that implicated the eldest son in a forged deed, and allowed the black eyes of rumor to fester in the rooms where conspirators gathered mercy. It turned out, became another instrument of rule. Years turned like pages worn thin. She sat in Harrow's chair often, not to pretend to grief, but to inhabit the geometry of power, the angles of sightlines in the hall, the pockets of influence in markets and monasteries, the men who spoke less when she sat watching. Under her hand, the estate stabilized. Tenants who once fled starving now lingered to plant autumn wheat. Courtiers learned to consult her on matters of law. The older houses grumbled, but bread is a patient argument. You do not dispute the taste of a warm crust when it keeps your children alive. Yet success breeds enemies, and enemies breed temptation to violence. The eldest son attempted a last claim, this time with borrowed soldiers and a torch plan to burn the steward's records, and with them, the proof of his misdeeds. The night he came, Elara had already anticipated the rout. She did not meet him with steel, she met him with certainty. The ambush that should have been a bloodbath turned into a rout. When grain carts, newly provisioned and visibly under her oversight, blocked the lane and families, rallied by her small favors, called out names they had learned to trust. The uprising failed not because she crushed it in blood, but because she had quietly rearranged the loyalties of a county. When the heir finally appeared, years older, wild from exile and with a hand stained by other men's fight, he expected to seize a kingdom. He found instead a woman who had already made herself the ledger of that kingdom. The court offered him a choice: exile and a modest keep, or a public trial that would further humiliate a name he could no longer defend. He chose exile, and the court learned a new lesson about the cost of spectacle when the people are fed. Decades passed. Coffers that had once creaked on their hinges brimmed. Letters came from neighboring lords seeking trade instead of war. The name Elara came to stand for a certainty the realm had never known. Order administered with a hand that did not flinch from cruelty when needed, and did not squander compassion when it was prudent. She made enemies. She made dependents. She made a peace that had the look of inevitability. The kingdom that had once smiled at her as a charity now trembled at her name, because she had become the one force that could not be easily bought or broken. The twist of her story was not in a single assassination or an explosive battle. It was in the quiet, deliberate choice she had made in the years after Harrow's death, in the apothecary's loft, where she had learned which tinctures consoled and which stopped. She had also learned maternity's small, guarded mercies. Years before the heir returned, when danger was still a rumor, she had given birth in secret to a boy whose father's name she never spoke. He was raised as a servant's son, taught the ledger and the plow, taught how to listen to a weeping woman without offering platitude. When the time was right, she revealed him not with trumpets, but with paperwork, a sealed codicil in Harrow's own hand, a legal maneuver that placed the boy's claim above the disgraced eldest son's. The revelation struck the court like thunder. The heir was not the blood of Harrow alone. The future had been rewritten by a woman who had learned how to turn law, loyalty, and secrecy into a single, inevitable instrument. The kingdom trembled not for the violence she had done, nor for the kindness she had withheld or given, but because she had shown the realm that the script of power could be rewritten by someone who had nothing at first but necessity and will. There is in that fact a lesson both bitter and lucid. Survival demands learning the tools of those who oppress you, and once learned, those tools can become the means to remake the world. If there is a single small lesson to carry from Elara's life, power seldom bows to rightful claim. It bows to whoever can make the people remember who fed them, who counted them, and who kept their children from the cold. If this story moved you, subscribe to our channel for more true-feeling histories that ask the hard questions and tell the full human cost of power.